Hello again. It's time for the Fantasy Sultans. He is the Hall of Famer Mike Sheck. I am Tripp Rogers, and we are set for Week 5 in the NFL. The bye week starts this week, or bye weeks. I wish I could speak English. You think I do this job for a living. It's amazing what happened. But yeah. Anyhow, the buys for this week are starting. Week 5 in the NFL. So first of all, Mike, what were your surprises from week number 4 in the National Football League?
Well, I'm kind of going to break it up into 3 different sections. I'm going to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And somehow I think
and
somehow I think the Giants will be in the ugly part of it.
Well, they could be. They weren't in my ugly, but I know they're in your ugly. I'm going to go with the good first, though, and start off with the feel-good story of C.J. Stroud in Houston. Texans turning in another great performance with a convincing win against a team that really should have beaten them in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Stroud threw over 300 yards against Pittsburgh and had a 2-touchdown day, passed over 1,200 yards so far on the season, second most for any rookie quarterback through 4 games. Houston is 2-2, and oh yeah, they are tied in the AFC South. We move along to the bad. And the team that played them, the Pittsburgh Steelers. What is going on in Pittsburgh? Just 2 field goals held out of the end zone against Houston. They lost 30-6. Houston, they don't have a problem, but Pittsburgh does. And I know that a lot of the blame is going to be laid out to offensive coordinator Matt Canada. 39 straight games now, by the way, without a 400-yard offensive performance. This is not looking good for Pittsburgh. A lot of people expected a change. Mike Tomlin announcing he is making a change, but it is not for Matt Canada. Of course, Kenny Pickett was injured last week too. He's got a bone bruise. They thought it was more severe, could have been out longer. He's questionable to play this week. And then the ugly, I'm going to talk about 2 teams that are very lackluster. That's the New England Patriots, un-Bill Belichick-like, and the Chicago Bears. Man, oh man. I mean, we can add the Giants. We can add the Carolina Panthers to this conversation as well. But New England, they just look terrible. And Mac Jones is on a short leash, 150 yards before he was benched last week. It is not looking good. I got news for you. It's going to turn up to be the Bailey Zappi show sooner than later if Mac Jones does not get his act together. Just that offense is not looking good at all. And then the Chicago Bears, well, they looked good. Justin Fields had a great performance, over 30 points in fantasy, but yet their defense squanders it to Denver. They give up 21 late in that game, and Denver wins it on a field goal. So, just a terrible performance by New England, Chicago. And oh, by the way, Chicago does have the first 2 picks next year. Why? Because Carolina traded up with them to get Bryce Young, and now they have the first and second pick by way of Carolina, who is also 0-4 with the Bears.
Oh yeah. There's a lot to unpack on that. And I want to take a couple of things off of that. First off, you're talking about Pittsburgh. I mean, this is just unbelievable how bad Pittsburgh is. And it's also going to play in our import export, because I just thought of another export I wanted to add on to my list. We had talked before we started recording. But Pittsburgh is they're awful. They're just awful right now.
Yeah.
And you talk about the Chicago Bears. You have that game. You have that game. You were going to win that game. And you gave it away. You gave it away. And Denver wins a game they had no business in winning. But in the NFL, sometimes that happens. As for the Patriots, again, you talk about disappointing fantasy performers. Ramondre Stevenson has been just awful so far this year. Yeah. And one of the reasons is because that Patriot offense is terrible. All right, well, we do what we do best here, and that's giving you imports and exports for week number 5. First off, the teams on bye: Cleveland Browns, Los Angeles Chargers, Seattle Seahawks, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, first of all, real quick on the Chargers, good kind of timing on this because fractured finger for quarterback Justin Herbert. It's not, they say he's probably going to be able to play. It says non-throwing hand. They'll tape it up probably, and they'll get a week time there for him to rest. So they think he is going to play. The Seahawks, same thing with their quarterback, Geno Smith, hurt his knee Monday night. He did come back in the game, and of course, did they really need Geno Smith at that point? Because the Giants just imploded on themselves on Monday. Tampa Bay Bucks getting a bye at a time. I mean, they're off to a 3-1 start, and that's pretty good. I mean, that's surprising. Let us talk about imports, exports. Let me go first this week. For my imports, how about Jaleel McLaughlin from Denver? Running back. Yeah, how about it? Let's talk about it. Yep. Javonte Williams went out after just 2 series and never returned because of hip injury. So that meant that Sean Payton needed someone, elevated McLaughlin, an undrafted prospect out of Youngstown State, into a prominent role next to Sanjay Perine in the backfield. He paced the backfield. He had a great week. However, it's one thing to pick him up, but you've got to watch him. You know, the old load issues from the NBA, load issues. He's only 5'7" and 187 pounds. He probably will be more along the lines of Darren Sproles. And again, if they get Javonte Williams back, he'll see his playtime down. But then again, he keeps performing like this. He'd be a guy I'd pick up. You never know down the road. He could be gold, especially if you have some injuries in that Denver backfield. All right, Michael Wilson for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, who actually expected us to be talking about the Arizona Cardinals in terms of fantasy relevance? I say this simply because of the fact that everybody picked them as being just awful this year. Just awful. And in fact, I think on this very program, if I'm not mistaken, the Hall of Famer Mike Scheck said, don't take anybody from the Arizona offense, period.
Yep.
I remember you saying that. Well, Wilson is somebody who is really surprised, keeps playing better each week. And of course, Josh Dobbs has done a great job so far for the Cardinals, and they have now won 2 in a row after losing their first 2 games of the year. He had a great performance. Wilson had a great performance in week 4 against the 49ers, ended up with 26.6 fantasy points. He had a great time. Now, here's the okay question mark. Yeah, you want to pick him up because he's probably available in your league, and he would be somebody to grab. But Kyler Murray is going to be coming back as quarterback. Now, I don't know if it's going to be sooner or later. He is eligible to come off the PUP list soon, but they may want to stick with a hot hand in Dobbs. But I think Wilson is a guy who, if you're looking to add a wide receiver, and at this point, there are probably some guys riding your bench you're saying, I don't know about. Wilson might be a guy to grab in Arizona. He's probably available in your league. Last but not least, again, we're getting into the buys, and you may want to, again, if you're in the position of you're not happy with your defense, and we've seen some stinko defensive performances, New York Giants, you may want to pick up a defense. How about the Miami Dolphins? Now, granted, I know they didn't do well last week in week number 4, but this is a defense that looked pretty good the first 3 weeks, and the Dolphins are going to play the New York Giants this week. So they'll be boosting those sack totals against the Giants. So they're going to, if you're looking for a streaming defense, you want to grab the Miami Dolphins. Exports. Oh, I think I've already telegraphed this one. The New York Giants defense. New York Giants offense too, for that matter, but New York Giants defense, a defense that was supposed to be very, very strong, and it was picked, I think, a top 10 defense by a lot of fantasy folks in the offseason. They're awful. They were awful. Monday night's performance was just pitiful. This is a team that the defense can't tackle, the offensive line can't block, and the quarterback can't. I mean, the quarterback is screwing up. I mean, let's be realistic here. There's no way to sugarcoat this. Giant defense export Daniel Jones. I had him as my quarterback in one of my teams, and one of the reasons I took him was because he had a week 13 bye. I'm not waiting till week 13. I'm getting rid of him. I'm moving up. Baker Mayfield was available in one of the leagues, and I grabbed Baker Mayfield, and he has surprised me with his performance this year. CJ Stroud, again, if he is available, grab him now because he has been great. And one other guy I want to throw in the exports, Najee Harris for the Steelers. Boy, he really is not showing anything. And if you have him in your starting lineup, you might want to think about putting him on the bench because at this point, he's not doing anything to really justify starting. And until the Steelers can get themselves straightened out offensively, I don't think so. Mr. Sheck, what do you have?
So either. I have him, and he's not straightening it out for me either.
Okay. What do you have for imports, exports?
Well, I'm going to start with 3 NFC imports this week, and I'm going to also talk about Arizona, who I said, yes, I did say a few weeks ago, do not pick up anybody from Arizona. Well, I'm reversing my statement on that one, and I'm going to start with Joshua Dobbs as quarterback. Last week against San Francisco, Dobbs threw for 265 yards, 2 touchdowns. In relief of Kyler Murray, Dobbs has over 800 yards and 4 total touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, he has not thrown an interception yet as well. Okay, I just cursed myself there.
You just jinxed him. I did. Jinxed him.
The announcer curse has come out. But this is 3 straight games for Dobbs with 40-plus rushing yards as well, so you can add that to your fantasy bank. Good news for Arizona. They do face the struggling Bengals in week 5. And you talked about Kyler Murray being eligible. I don't think he comes back anytime soon. In fact, they're saying in Arizona, he is weeks away from coming back onto the field. So I think this injury is going to take longer than expected. Next up, Jameson Williams, wide receiver in Detroit. Now, you may recall that he was suspended 6 games for violating the league's gambling policy. And last week, the league revised its rules and made the suspension only 4 weeks. So it was cut back, and now he's eligible to play this week. Now, he did barely anything on offense. Why? Because he had the ACL injury last season, suspension this season. So you're kind of thinking to yourself, okay, well, this doesn't sound like a great pickup. Well, guess again, because the early bird catches the worm, and he faces the Carolina secondary this week, who's given up big plays to wide receivers. I think this is a good import. Pick him up. If you have the roster space, he would be a great import. Finally,
one thing real quick before I interrupt you, I just want to interrupt you real quick. You speak about him. I grabbed him as a late round pick in my draft, and I've had him sitting on the bench. And so if you did do that, you're rewarded. But if he is available in your league, you'll want to grab him this week, because if you don't, somebody else is going to get him. Even if you're going to put him on the roster and just sit him for a week, it's better to have it than not. And like I said, my sitting him for 4 weeks has been justified because he's now back on the roster, and he's a playmaker. I mean, he showed it last year when he came off when he got back into the lineup for Detroit at the end of the season, and he's a playmaker. And they were looking forward to him this year. They really were. Sorry to interrupt. The Hall of Famer
and if you
continues.
And if you can get him on the waiver wire, he's 30% rostered. So that's good news there. Finally, tight end Jake Ferguson from Dallas is another import. Ferguson has not mustered a great start, but the past few games he's come on very strongly. 77 yards last week against New England, and despite winning 38-3, that offense still finding itself. But Ferguson's been a consistent factor the past few weeks for Dallas. Hey, Jake from Dallas. What are you wearing, Jake from Dallas? A uniform? Sounds like an import to me. All right, I want to go to 2 quick exports. The New York Jets and their running back, Dalvin Cook, 74 rushing yards as opposed to Breece Hall's 220. Breece Hall is just the guy in that offense, but, only 300 yards for the Jets on the ground. That's not good. I mean, the Jets, we talked about it this season. We expected a lot of big things. Now, of course, Breece Hall has had the ACL recovery, so we expected kind of a slow start. But I just think that Dalvin Cook is in the twilight of his career now. It has not been good for him, and Breece Hall will be up and coming, but again, expected a slow start. Another export is Hunter Renfrow in Las Vegas. He's been a non-factor in the Raiders offense this year, 52 yards on 5 catches through 3 games. I'd sooner want Jacoby Myers or Josh Jacobs catching passes out of the backfield, because I'll tell you what, Jacobs has almost 4 times the yardage in receiving than Renfrow. It goes to show you how well that offense is working with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and of course, Josh Jacobs. How about we add one more import? As you and I were talking off the air just before we started the podcast, Joe Burrow owners, man, oh man, it has not been good for him. Now, I have Anthony Richardson as a backup quarterback. I drafted him in one of the leagues. Surprisingly, he has done fabulous, and he has scored at least 20 points per game when he's played, had the concussion issue, but when he's played, over 20 points when Joe Burrow has mustered only single digits. This is bad news for Burrow owners. I need consistency out of Burrow before I start him. Not saying you should send him to waivers. You bench him now. If you have a backup quarterback, you play your backup quarterback like I do in Anthony Richardson. But if you don't, go to the waiver wire. See, you can, you mentioned CJ Stroud is a great import. Pick him up.
I also mentioned Baker Mayfield. Again,
Baker
he's
Mayfield,
a guy probably that's available in your leagues. I'm not ready to anoint Sam Howell, although, I mean, I think he's got, but Mike, I like what you're saying, and I agree with you, because, we now have, 4 games, and Burrow's calf injury, okay, maybe it is the calf injury. Maybe that's still bothering him, but this Cincinnati team just not looking good. And I really think that Burrow, he's got with the contract extension, he's got a big target on his back. I hate to say that. That's the one thing that bothers me. And Cincinnati is underperformed. And, you even mentioned it. Houston's tied for first in that AFC South. And, that's surprising. And the AFC North is just as bad. I mean, I'm trying to think. I think 2-2's got the division lead there in the North. So I don't know. And again, you're talking about a Cincinnati team that a lot of people expected to be playing. I mean, the Chiefs. I think they expect the Chiefs, Bills, and the Bengals were all going to be in the hunt for the Super Bowl in the AFC, and it's not worked out that well for Cincinnati right now. And I'm not ready to pull the plug on Joe Mixon yet, but there's another person who you might want to look at. Again, we talk about teams on bye this week. And one of the things, again, I recommend you do, I've been doing that and I've done it. I know you do it. Look ahead. Look and see how many buys you have coming up the following week, and try and plug your holes in a week early. Because if you're going to go for a defense or a kicker, you may want to get them early rather than late, because if you go to the waiver wire the week of and they're still available and you don't have the waiver position in your league, you're not going to get the kicker you want, and you'll have to settle. The other side of it is you may have to scramble to get somebody depending on your waiver wire rules, because some leagues you only process waivers on Wednesday and Saturday. So therefore, if you try to grab somebody who plays Thursday night, you're not going to get them in time. And that could be a big issue for you. Just, again, something to think about. Know the rules of your league too. And the waiver wire, the waiver rules especially, will come into play. We're here to help you. We try to do the best we can. We give you imports and exports. We're not always right, but we're pretty good. I like our percentages. Again, you win 2 out of 3 games each week. You're doing pretty good in the game of life. Would you take 2 out of 3 wins each week? Would you?
I know Meatloaf would.
2 out of 3 ain't bad. You're right. There you go.
Yep.
You got any questions or comments about our podcast, please feel free to reach out. We're the Fantasy Sultans at gmail.com. You can find our podcast on YouTube. Just search Fantasy Sultans. You can also find it on Spotify for podcasters. Again, just search for Fantasy Sultans. Also, be on the lookout for my podcast, Tripp's Take, which also drops on Thursdays at those same fine locations. Like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, give a listen to WTRSradio.com online. Join us again next week. Week number 6 of the NFL will be here before we know it. We give you the info you need. We try to help you. We're giving. He's the Hall of Famer, Mike Scheck. I'm Tripp Rogers. Together, we are the Fantasy Sultans.
And you are not.